Macromolecules in organisms. There are four major categories of large molecules in cells. We can also call these organic molecules because they have 2 carbons or more. There are carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. We're going to look at each of these, and we're going to start with carbohydrates. For each of these, you're going to need to know the monomer that makes it up. You're going to need to know the polymers that are made, examples of each, and elements of each. So we're going to take carbohydrates first in this segment today, and then we'll do lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. Carbohydrates. Carbohydrates include small sugar molecules that you find in soft drinks, and they also include larger starch molecules that you find in pasta. Starch is a long molecule. It's a polymer that you find in plants. So the starch molecules came from wheat in this case. And you also have long glycogen molecules in animals, like these really cute alpacas. So glycogen you find in animals and starch you find in plants. They are both polymers, and we'll talk about those in a little bit. So we're going to dissect the word carbohydrate right now. For carbo, that's carbon. And when you think of hydrate, what do you think of? I'm so dehydrated. That means I really need a drink. Once I have my water, I drink it up and I say, oh, I'm so hydrated. So hydrate means water. Fire hydrant is another example of that. So that would be the thing that's outside and it's red, and firefighters will open that up to connect their fire hoses and put out water. So a hydrant means that there's water there. So that's carbo, the C, and then hydrate for water. So carbohydrates all have this general formula, CH2O. So that means there could be a carbohydrate that's C6, H. How many H's would you have? Well, if there's 1 carbon for every 2 hydrogens, that means if you have 6 carbons, you will have 12 hydrogens. And how many O's would you have? Well, it's 1 to 1, so you would have 6 O's. If you have a molecule that is C300, H, let's say 580, to O 293, well, those ratios are roughly 1 to 2 to 1. And so that again would be a carbohydrate. So this is the general ratio for all carbohydrates. What's the actual formula for a carbohydrate like glucose? And there it is. So if you count up your carbons, they're already counted for you in red. And so there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 carbons here. So for every 6 carbons, I'm hoping to find roughly 12 hydrogens. So let's count them. There's H2, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So that would be H12. Good. C6, H12, then there should be an O6. So here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That would be 6. So that's the formula for glucose. You can either draw it out like this, or you can just write it like this. Yay. There are 3 levels of carbohydrates that I need you to know. The simplest are monosaccharides. And so we talked about, when we did polysaccharides in general, we talked about monomers and polymers. Sorry, when we did the intro unit on polymers, we talked about monomers. So a monomer is just 1 unit. A monosaccharide is a monomer of a carbohydrate. A disaccharide is something new that I haven't talked to you about yet. That would be a dimer of a carbohydrate. So that's 2 monosaccharides together. So mono means 1, di means 2. And then the next level is poly. So we just go 1, 2 to many. So poly doesn't mean 3 here. That's just the level. Poly means many. And so the generic term would be a polymer. You can have polymers of carbohydrates, you can have polymers of proteins, polymers of nucleic acids. We're talking about polymers of carbohydrates. So the name for the polymer of a carbohydrate is a polysaccharide. Ask your parents what saccharin means. There was an artificial sweetener that we used to use 20 years ago or so named saccharin. And if you use that still, then that would be easy to remember this, but it's not sold anymore. Monosaccharides, we'll look at monosaccharides first. Again, mono means one, like monotheist or monogamy. So that means one sugar unit. So examples are glucose, deoxyribose, ribose, fructose, and galactose. One thing that you should notice with all of these is that their names always end in "-ose". So when you're naming a sugar, you end it with "-ose". Another really interesting thing to look at is the names between deoxyribose and ribose. Ribose and deoxyribose are the same, except this one, D, has one less oxygen. And that'll come up later. So there's a monomer, glucose. Glucose is the sugar that circulates in your bloodstream. So here is the red blood cells, and this is a white blood cell, I guess. And glucose is in the plasma, which is the liquid part of the blood. So this one, you should put a star next to this one. This is a really important one for you to know because we talk about it a lot. We'll talk about what, at least at a general level, what the problem is with people with insulin deficiencies, people with diabetes of different types. So glucose is the sugar that circulates in your bloodstream. That's the sugar that your body uses when it wants to make ATP, which is the direct energy source for your cells. Fructose is found only in fruits, and that you actually don't really have to memorize. I'm just giving you an example. Another monosaccharide, glucose and fructose are both found in honey. And again, that's not something you really need to memorize. You should know this one, that glucose is the sugar in your bloodstream. Galactose is called milk sugar, and that is in milk. Here's what you need to know from all of those. OSE, O-S-E, ending means sugar. So you can put a star next to that one too. Something to memorize. In aqueous or water solutions, monosaccharides form ring structures. So you can draw glucose straight, or you can draw it in a circle. Either one's okay. Function. Monosaccharides are the main energy source that cells use for cellular work. Let's call it a quick energy source. This is not how you store energy. So if you can write in the word quick in your notes. Monosaccharides are the main quick energy source that cells use for work. So this process, you might pause for a minute and see if you can figure out what this is. Right now I'm just going to tell you this is cellular respiration, aerobic cellular respiration. So this is a chemical reaction, a series of chemical reactions that occur in your mitochondria. So here's glucose. And so when you see C6H12O6, you've got to know that's glucose. We've looked at this equation before, but now I want you to know that this thing is glucose. So you take that and 6 oxygens and you break a whole bunch of bonds and you move electrons from the bonds into little compartments, and that helps you break down this energy-rich food into an energy-rich molecule called ATP. So to remind you, these things are the reactants. And what you get at the end, what you produce, are called the products. So you have 6 carbons here, you've got 6 carbons here, 12 hydrogens, you've got 6 times 2 is 12 hydrogens, and then you've got, let's see, 6 oxygens plus 12 oxygens, that's 18, 6, 12 from here, and then another 6 here, that makes 18. So your elements work out, and then take a look at this. You can't gain weight by breathing in oxygen. You can't gain weight by breathing CO2. You can't gain weight by drinking water. But glucose certainly is a high energy molecule, and that energy is transferred to ATP, which is another high energy molecule. This is what your body uses as quick energy. This is actually the real molecule that a cell will use when it has to do something. So when you're contracting a muscle, you use ATP to make the proteins change shape and do what they need to do. So I'll show you lots of examples of that. Disaccharide, di means two. So a disaccharide is a two sugar unit. There are two glucose molecules, and if they are bound together, now you don't have a monomer. Now you have two of them. That's a dimer, or a disaccharide in this case. So examples are sucrose, lactose, and maltose. Sucrose is glucose and fructose. You don't really need to memorize that that sucrose is made out of glucose and fructose, but you should know that if it's ose, and ose, that it's a sugar. Sucrose is table sugar. That's the stuff that you put in your cereal. Let me go backwards one. You might know lactose. That's found in milk, made out of galactose, which is milk sugar plus glucose. Disaccharides are made by joining two monosaccharides. So glucose and fructose bound together makes sucrose. In other words, let me go back. In other words, a monomer plus a monomer bound together make a dimer. Or, since it's carbohydrates, a monosaccharide plus a monosaccharide bound together make a disaccharide. So this is a monosaccharide. This is another monosaccharide. You put them together, you get a disaccharide, or two. Disaccharides are what plants use to transport energy. So you would imagine that it makes sense that you're going to transport small molecules for energy, not huge polymers. So we transport monomers, plants transport dimers. So you can see this is a sugar maple, and if you think about what happens in the spring to trees, they've spent the whole year before them doing photosynthesis and making lots and lots of sugar. And then in the fall, they drop their leaves. But before they do that, they take in as much of the sugar as they can and they transport it down to their roots. And that way it gets stored there all winter long. When it's time to start growing the leaves again, that sugar comes up and it's going to the buds it's going to go to the branches and the buds, and it's going to start making the buds grow so that you can start to make leaves. So that energy was made the year before and it's brought up. So this is a disaccharide that's brought up to the top of the tree to start making leaves. And if you stick a spigot in there, you can actually take some of that sap off. And so here are the buckets where they're collecting some of that, and the girl is drinking some of that. This will make maple syrup if you boil it down. I don't know what the ratio is, but you take this stuff and you boil a lot of the water off, and that will make maple syrup. Yum. Okay, polysaccharides. Polysaccharide is many sugar units. And so here's an example of a polysaccharide. So glucose to glucose to glucose to glucose, a whole bunch of glucoses will make many together, which is cellulose. Here's another polysaccharide, mono to mono to mono to mono makes poly. So polysaccharides are complex carbohydrates. You'll use this for longer term energy storage, not for years, but for many hours. They are made of many sugar monomers linked together. Polymers of monosaccharide chains. So that's this. And we're going to stop there for now.